What if instead of calling it Advent, we called it Lessvent? Or subtraction vent. The last thing that we want to do is just add more to people's lists of to-dos. So I do agree that one of the most important spiritual practices for like upwardly mobile middle class people who are stuck in the worship of success, because that's our idol, right? Success is our idol. Is to this Advent, instead of attending every program and every party and everything and hanging all the lights and doing wrapping all the presents, what if you just didn't?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pivot Podcast, where we explore how the church can faithfully navigate a changing world. I'm Dwight Shiley, and I'm joined by Terry Elton.
As we enter Advent, many church leaders can find themselves a little bit like Martha in Luke 10, worried and distracted by many things. Advent is a time of expectant waiting. But we live in a culture surrounded with things that conspire against it, conspire against stillness and patience and deep focus, especially focusing on the one thing that Martha's sister Mary is commended for by Jesus as she sits at his feet.
That's right, Terry, and that's why we are so excited to welcome Dr. Steve Thomason back to the Pivot Podcast. So Steve is Associate Professor of Spiritual Formation and Dean of the Chapel here at Luther Seminary. He's a visual artist and theologian. He's the author of The Visual Preacher and The Cartoonist's Guide to the Bible. So one of the pivots that we discuss regularly on this show is a pivot in posture from primarily focusing on fixing the institutional problems of the church to a posture of listening, discerning, and experimenting, where we seek to follow where God is leading. So in a season where many church leaders can find themselves caught in the busyness of Advent, Steve invites us to pivot toward practices of deep listening and contemplation. And he's offering something really special for our listeners, which is a free 4-day Advent challenge that will help us make this pivot from the holiday rush to sacred presence through art and contemplation. And that starts on December 2nd, and there's a link in the show notes. We'll say more about that later. But Steve, welcome to Pivot.
Thanks. It's really great to be back.
So, Steve, let's just jump in. In an increasingly busy and noisy season that we're going to be entering here, how can contemplative practices just help us reconnect with the sacred?
Oh, wow. That's a great question.
I told you, we're going right for it. Uh-huh.
I start off by saying how much I love Advent. I think it's my favorite season because I didn't grow up with it. I grew up in a different tradition than the mainline Lutheran tradition. And Advent wasn't a thing. I always thought Advent was a calendar where you got a candy every day.
The chocolate?
25,
yeah.
But it was a countdown to Christmas, right? And so when I entered into the Lutheran world, like honestly, I had never practiced Advent before 2010. And when I became a Lutheran pastor, now let me preface this. I have always, not always, but most of my adult life, I have been deeply involved in spiritual practices and spiritual formation and the process of stilling and quieting and slowing and the necessity for being centered in a stillness, rooted in Christ. That's always been part of my spirituality and relationship with God through Christ. And so when I stepped into Advent, I was like, this is the season of that.
This is my time.
This is my time. Because when you look at, being a citizen of the United States and a product, I'm a hard Gen Xer, right? I'm a product of a material girl in a material world and the consumerism of Christmas. And it just starts earlier every year and everybody complains about it, but then they just go right into it and do it. And so Advent is this beautiful opportunity baked right into the liturgical calendar to be countercultural, to be revolutionary. And by the way, I just heard a pastor just this weekend talk about the word revolution, that it means the turning, revolving, back to something, right? So a revolution isn't changing and doing something new. A revolution is coming back to what it should have been in the first place. Isn't that cool? Right?
So we're going to have an Advent revolution.
Advent revolution and an Advent conspiracy, right? And that's a big movement, Advent conspiracy, which I have done in churches. I think that's actually a good, like, practical practice, is that whole movement. But so Advent for me, because it's so countercultural, can I just talk a little bit about the history of Advent?
Sure.
And why it's so cool? And my historian friends are probably going to correct me on the minutia of this, but this is how I understand the history of Advent and how it works for me, is that Advent is particularly upper northern hemisphere. Advent doesn't make any sense in Australia, right?
It's not winter.
Because it's not winter,
and
right?
Dark.
And dark. Because Advent was the process of taking the good news of Jesus Christ, which was a Mediterranean thing, and trying to communicate it to Northern European tribal people. And that pre-Christian Northern European spirituality was deeply connected to the movements of the earth, right? And the movements of the sun and the changing of the seasons. And so the people, I'll just say Celtic people, but there's, like, every tribe, right, has some version of it, has this deep sense of the sun is dying in winter. And they're waiting for it to die, knowing that at the solstice it's going to be reborn and light will be reborn. So, here in Minnesota, it makes total sense to us because we're at the same latitude as those Europeans, right?
I was just saying, this was the conversation at my dinner table last night with my husband.
Yeah, so
it is dying, the sunlight.
The sunlight is dying. Mm-hmm. So if you are a person who lives in our climate zone, you know, like the expression, make hay while the sun's shining, makes sense because you do all of your hard work in the summer when you can actually grow food. So think pre-refrigeration, all this stuff. You got to work super hard. And then you've got to preserve all that food to last through the winter. And then all of a sudden December comes, everything's frozen, you can't grow anything, and you really don't want to go outside, and the sun is dying. What do? Well, we put evergreens around because it reminds us that summer will come back. And then we light candles because the candles work against the darkness and the candles give us hope for the rebirth of light. Well, so that's the culture of this ancient European, Northern European. So then the message of Jesus comes and they're like, how do you communicate? This is good missiology, right? It's like, how do you communicate this message of Jesus to this pagan spirituality? It's like, oh, it really fits because there's this anticipation of the birth of light. And so you have the Christ Mass that gets associated around the solstice and all that. And so the Advent season, even before the good news of Jesus came, was this silent, dark anticipation of something good happening that was going to bring life back to our people. Because if we stay in this darkness, we'll die because our food's going to run out, right? Everything's frozen. So then you bring the Jesus story into that and tie it to the prophets of the Hebrew scripture who were anticipating and waiting. And I think about the prophets who are sitting in the darkness of exile or the darkness of another empire is destroying us. And where is God? And how long, O Lord, right? And it's just dark and bleak but they trust in the promise that the Messiah is coming. And that's Advent, right? And so you light a candle each week and the light and the hope just increases week by week. And the only way to get into the true spirit of Advent is to slow down. And here's the problem. In our society, artificial light has destroyed darkness, but not really. It has artificially destroyed darkness, right? And so because we can burn electrical lights, we can pretend the darkness isn't around us. And we can be happy all through Advent. And so when you don't have a Jesus Advent that you're hoping for, and you don't actually, so Christian spirituality has to embrace darkness. It has to embrace suffering. It has to embrace stillness. It has to embrace the deep part of reality, which is slow. So I just love Advent because, so again, you come into this moment where in our secular, hyper-commercialized version of it, it's about Christmas, but it's about the Coca-Cola invented Santa Claus and about buying gifts so that the economy will thrive. It's worshiping all the gods of our secular economy, right? And so when you help a congregation embrace the Advent spirit, you can say, let's just put all that aside. And let's save Christmas for the 12 days, right? And each week, let's do some practices that will force us to acknowledge the fact that it's really getting darker outside, right? So turn off all the electrical lights and light one candle. And what if instead of like talking about it, let's just sit in silence for a while. Wouldn't that be cool? Mm-hmm. Right? So I don't know, if maybe ask another question.
Well, let's just kind of explore that a little bit more, thinking theologically together a bit about this culture that we're in, and why it does what it does. I mean, you use the word pagan to describe these ancient Northern European tribal cultures, but we now live in what is in America very much in Western Europe a new pagan society. I'm fascinated by Tara Isabel Burton's language of intuitional religions that function in today's culture in the West alongside the institutional religions, and things like wellness and things like the kind of transhumanist sort of AI, like technology is going to allow us to surpass all human limitations. And she talks about the religion of social justice, kind of secular social justice, all of which have the self at the center as the ultimate God, in some ways, certainly the ultimate authority. And a lot of course, busyness and activity and a kind of profound self-justification, we might say, at the heart of all of that, rather than understanding our identities as gift from God and being normed around God. But I want to talk about the church version of that, right? Because it's so easy for churches to simply embrace some of those same cultural trends and get caught up in them as churches are looking at the bottom line, and just like businesses, right? Like we got to get the money in before the calendar year ends and all of that. And we got to get people busy and engaged, right? Or somehow we're not succeeding in our institutional mission. And then I think a lot of people are just stepping away from that now, pursuing perhaps these intuitional religions functionally, right? But how might churches really be alternative communities that live out of a different narrative?
Man, if you can answer that question, you're going to solve the whole problem of the world. Well, you named so many things in what you just said. So much of our identity as church is actually a business identity, because we have allowed the need to balance the budget. And I mean, let's be honest, right? I've been a pastor for 30 years. I've been in multiple contexts. You have buildings, and buildings cost money. And if you don't have people, you're not going to have them. You get easily trapped in a society that says you have no value unless you're producing something. And you have no value unless you're making that thing better and progress, the whole acceleration thing that you guys have been talking a lot about. And what popped in my mind when you were talking was the Hebrew law of Jubilee and how radical that law was. Can you imagine everybody saying, okay, all debts are forgiven. Everything goes back to its original owner. What? We being Western society, we are so defined by the stuff we own. And the stuff, like I have my property, I have my house, I have my stuff, and I got to pay for it all. So I got to have my job to make, I pay my income taxes, all that stuff. It's that radical individualism. And the church is an opportunity to try to counter that culture. But I will be honest, it's seemingly impossible to do that. Like, how do you actually, I've tried. Like, I actually unplugged from the megachurch world and was anti-institutional, like burn it all down and just be organic community. And what I discovered was it's really hard to do when you live in a suburban context where nobody knows what community is. Like, I don't actually experience community, even in my own life. I live in a cul-de-sac. Nobody talks to me, right? And so, like, I just don't know how you can artificially create community. It's going back to the idea of, like, electric light has seduced us into thinking darkness doesn't exist, right? It's like the culture itself is so interdependence and community. And so, listeners are probably like, well, what's the point? Let's just go have fun until we die. So, like, getting practical, my problem is that I am an abstract thinker and an idealist, and I can talk myself into these dark pits. And then all my practical friends come along and say, okay, Steve, that's nice, but let's do something practical about it. Praise God for the whole fullness of the body of Christ, right? So, like, practical things you can do is, I just want to say one thing about that I think a leader can do today about the spirit of Advent. I don't know if this is answering your question, but I'm just going to talk about it. The one thing that a leader might have some control over is their own life and their own practice. And so if you want to lead your congregation into a slowness of Advent, then you as a leader have to be in a slowness of life, right? I'm teaching this course on discipleship in the missional church right now. And one of the things that I keep coming back to is that if you are not practicing the things that you're asking your people to do, they're not going to do them, right? I mean, maybe some will. They'll catch it on. But so even something as simple as when you get up in front of your congregation, what's your body like? Or better than that, what are you like in the narthex walking to worship? Because anybody can pretend to be still up in front. But as you carry yourself through the body of people in your narthex waiting, what energy are they picking up from your body? Like, are you calm and present and not rattled? Or are you freaking out about everything in the world right now? Because that's what they're going to remember about you. And that's what they're going to actually catch from you. And so the first thing that a leader should do, sorry if I'm shoulding on you, is make sure that you start your day grounded in your relationship with God through Christ and the power of the Spirit. Whatever you need to do to get into that space, don't go meet your people until your heart is still, right?
Yeah.
That's step one, I think.
So I want to jump on that because I too love Advent. I, on the opposite of you, grew up. My dad was a pastor, and we were like forced as kids to do the Advent wreath, and after dinner, go into the dark living room and light the candle, and we all fought over who got to do what, because I like to play with fire, so that was a fun thing for me. And we read, he was creative. I give my dad lots of credit for trying to do that. But what has been interesting is I now long for that, right? There was a practice developed, but the funny part as I reflect back is the practices were the practices that our church formation practices. The practices of themselves aren't uniquely Advent.
No.
But there's something about the time of Advent that I think draws out certain practices in a new way. So as you think about, all right, if we were to bring communities around some of the many spiritual practices we have, what are ones that you found really align with the Advent spirit and kind of help draw people if they're new or not, right?
That's a great question. And before I answer that specifically, you activated something in my mind about the seasons.
Yeah.
Because I do think that our spiritual life is seasonal.
Yeah.
Because there's a season for everything. There is a season to just get out there and work hard and do hard ministry work. And there's a season to just stop. And that's part of what I think the liturgical calendar is really helpful for. And again, it's really tied to 4 really distinct seasons because people in the Mediterranean where it's like 12 hours of daylight and it's always warm, it's a different rhythm. And I didn't live that. So but I did live in the desert. So never mind. So here's the thing. It isn't specifically Advent, but it is specifically the slowing down. And so really practical things I've done in churches in different contexts is we would create, an Advent devotional space, and we would just, as a community, we would covenant, commit to one another to spend X number of minutes every morning. And we would give them spend this much time just breathing. And here's a simple text. Read the text, soak in the text, the Lectio Divina kind of stuff, and just not like this long thing you have to read and then analyze and answer a bunch of questions, but just a guide to have a morning or evening, whichever's better for your body, to be still, and put it into really concrete steps, like do this and just try this. Because for Advent is a season where a lot of people can maybe be introduced to the practices of stillness and solitude. And so there's that kind of communally, teach about it in November, prepare your congregation for this practice, model it, even sit up there, one sermon might be just actually demonstrating this simple practice, right? Or having a funny skit of people not doing it well and people doing it well, or, something, be playful with it. And then get people to commit some kind of loving covenant of, for 4 weeks, we're going to try this, where every morning or every evening, we're going to do this 15-minute practice. That's some form of centering prayer, of just being present with Christ. I want to tell my story about last night right now.
Do you have a story to tell us?
I have a story to tell.
Awesome.
So last night, I was invited to be with 100 middle schoolers, which any of you who work with middle schoolers know, you can just imagine a room full of 100 middle schoolers and what that's like. And I was invited to come and introduce spiritual practices to them, particularly through my art, because I use art as a form of contemplative practice. And so, but what I did was I took this group through a breathing exercise where I had them breathe deeply and, use the imagination. And this is something that you can do in worship. I think it'd be really cool to do this in a worship context. I like to help people The imagination is a powerful tool for our spirituality, right? It's a gift from God. And imagine what the unconditional love of God looks like for you. And when you breathe in, breathe that thing into your body. And then imagine, of course, these are middle schoolers, right? So a lot of anxiety going on, a lot of stuff happening, all the trouble that they're having. I say, take all that stuff that's just freaking you out right now and put it imagine it somehow. And then when you exhale, imagine it like going out of your body and giving it to God. So when you breathe in that love of God. And I tell them right there, I said, the one thing I know to be true about you is that God is crazy in love with you, right? And that's who God is. Breathe that in. Exhale all the junk. So we did that 3 times. It's really quiet. And I said, here's the thing. God is always talking, but he talks in a whisper. It was so quiet, but it was great microphone, so you could do that and like you could hear it. And that moment of total silence in a room of 100 middle schoolers was a holy moment. It was so cool. Do that in worship as a way to like have an embodied experience of what you're asking people to enter into on a regular basis. Now imagine if you started your day every day like that. And imagine, so when I was growing up, a huge part of my life, my quiet time. So I grew up in a tradition where we talked about having a quiet time. And I still do every day. But I called it the garden. And I imagined myself every morning in, the Secret Garden. Did you ever read that book? So I imagined like this beautiful walled-in garden. And I would walk into the garden to spend time with Jesus. And the garden needed tending. Like I couldn't sit and be still with Jesus until I pulled the weeds, right? And so I visually imagined that. And just the process of, okay, I just need to declutter. And now we can sit. Now I'm going to read the scripture. And that's Jesus talking to me, right? And now I'm going to talk. And that's my prayer. So that imagination of that garden time was really helpful, imaginative, spiritual space for me to be quiet. And so whatever it takes for you to get into that quiet space where you can hear the still voice of God so that you can breathe and then go into the maelstrom of American society and be like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
So I hear you inviting us on the one hand to some addition, some maybe inviting people into some new practices, but also subtraction. And I think that's really important for us to talk about a bit, because often people in churches will think, well, if we're going to, now it's Advent, so we add things in, or it's Lent, we add a lot of things. We ask people to get busier. But you're talking about a kind of stillness and a subtraction and a simplification. I recall our former colleague, Pat Kiefert, in their research with congregations, one of the things that they found was a strong correlation between a congregation's ability to sit in silence and its ability to adapt and go deeper spiritually, and particularly in connection with its neighbors. I think that's a fascinating correlation that sometimes we don't always make, but I think there's something there. And in this society that is very loud right now, especially, the silence, the invitation to silence and the communal sharing of silence seems to be pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think so. I just, as you were saying that, I thought, what if instead of calling it Advent, we called it Lessvent? Or subtraction vent. Yeah, I love that, because the last thing that we want to do is just add more to people's lists of to-dos. So
Right.
I do agree that one of the most important spiritual practices for like upwardly mobile middle class people who are stuck in the worship of success, because that's our idol, right? Success is our idol. Is to this Advent, instead of attending every program and every party and everything and hanging all the lights and doing wrapping all the presents, what if you just didn't? Right? Or drop one of them, like we can ease into the water. And that's why, like, another communal practice, a lot of churches do like Advent meals, like Wednesday night communal meals, and they do that through Lent too. There's a similar vibe in Lent, but it's a different purpose. That's another thing I love about like a simple communal meal as part of the Advent communal practice. Part of the reason for that is because it takes one other thing off of your plate where you don't have to prepare a meal that day. It's part of the purpose of Sabbath, right? Like, you're not supposed to make a meal on Sabbath. You're supposed to prepare the meal before Sabbath so that on Sabbath, you don't have to do that work. And so to have a simple communal meal where the congregation can gather in whatever space you gather and just eat together without an agenda is also another form of slowing down and being present. And that doesn't have to be a silence sit. Maybe you have the meal and then you go sit in silence for 20 minutes in the sanctuary and sing a hymn and go home. Wouldn't that be an amazing Advent practice?
Very simple.
Well, two things that came for me. One is the whole sense of, I think, music. Music can be the crazy, busy, go to all these things, or it can actually be come and be. Come and hear the story. Come and dwell. It's another kind of dwelling in the Word, but with all the things of sounds and sights that bring us into this story. And I think that might be something we're already doing. It's on our list, but we can make it be a check, or we can lean in and let God speak. Yeah. Right? So I think...
Are you saying, like, literally the music that we choose? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. What popped in my mind is that's why Gregorian chants were created, right? They're monotone and they like embody this slowing. And excuse me, when I'm in my own quietness, when I do contemplative art, I put on a playlist that is, it's a deep focus playlist. And that kind of music just like gets deep into you and puts you in a different space. It's not like, I'm a big 80s rock guy. Like, I love hardcore music and when I'm working out, right? Because it gets my heart going and I can exercise. But when it's time to get still, the music really does help you. No words, just slow instruments. Yeah, I agree.
The other thing that I thought of is so often, this is kind of, Dwight, to counter the what's in the culture. We have, and I grew up with this and have continued it with my family, what does it mean to give to the least of these, or to see the least of these among us, and to take the giving spirit of the season and redirect it. One of my biggest memories as a kid. So I was a pastor's kid. My mom didn't work. There's 4 of us. One of my best ways, we had Spam hot dish, and we would take half of a gallon of milk with a half a gallon of powdered milk and pour it together, and that was dinner sometimes. Like, we were not living high on the hog, right, to use that. We had plenty. Like we weren't, I did not think we were poor, right? But I remember us, my mom and my brothers and I, in the station wagon, delivering bags of groceries to people the week before Christmas. Didn't know we were coming, and the looks on their faces. And I think as a kid, to see the least of these, to see who might be hurting, who might be lonely, who might be, right? I'm using that in the broadest term. And I think there's a practice around redirecting giving and receiving, not to the cultural capitalism economy wars, but to seeing each of us as God's beloved humans.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. And it is interesting, like congregations often turn to that kind of work around Advent and Lent. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important. You should keep doing that. And I was just remembering as you were talking, I was thinking about people who experience homelessness. The only thing they can do is sit. Like this sense of not connected to all the trappings of our lives, of running around, and so I was taken back to when we were doing a house church, and our practice of house church was just show up in the house, and it's not a program. It's let's just eat together and talk about what, we committed to reading scripture every day during the week, and we just showed up and said, what God teach us this week, let's eat together. And so when the community that lived in the wash behind us, when they showed up, they just sat with us and ate, right? We were all equally just sitting and eating. Yeah. It wasn't like we have to program for you and give you some kind of handout, but as humans, we all just sit and eat together. It's just this simplicity of being with people. I think, man, what would that be like? Like if a church congregation is near an encampment, what if instead of let's go hand out sandwiches, it's like, what if we just went and sat and listened to stories or shared stories? That'd be wild, right?
Well, and I think we often make Advent, my point of this, which you're highlighting, is we often make it so churchy, and so what happens in the building or around a liturgical calendar, when there's actually missional practices as well, right? That are equally as countercultural and equally as part of our spiritual formation practices.
Well, speaking of practices, as we wrap up this episode, you're offering a 4-day Advent challenge. What inspired it, and what can participants expect?
Yeah. Well, so the story is that, I am the art pastor. That's my jam. That's what I like to do. And I have a regular practice of doing a live stream. I love digital technology, and I'm interested in how digital technology can connect people in ways that embodied presence can't, like, you know what I mean? Like in the same room kind of presence, because it's all embodied. And so I just live stream. And what I love watching artists do live streams as they demonstrate how they do art. And so I've been experimenting with doing a weekly live stream where my fusion of art and theology just comes out. So each week it's a different thing. Sometimes I'm just doing contemplative drawing with great music playing, and people can watch, and I just talk as I go through, kind of get my Bob Ross jam going. Sometimes I'm actually doing like theological teaching, working through a text or whatever. So every week. So last year, I decided to live stream around Advent. And so every week of Advent, and I advertised it and tried to make it like an event that people could participate in. And so I would take the theme, I'd read us the texts for the week, and then I created an original piece of art during that live stream. So that is a historical fact. Like I did that last year. Well, this year, the Faith+Lead team said, we love that. What if we took the videos from last year's live stream, put them through the magic box called Citraka, who is our editor, and turn them into beautiful works of art where people can watch those live streams with beautiful music playing. And he made them so there's no like dead space. It's just like really interesting the whole time. which isn't when you're live with me. So he turned them into these 4 videos, and the team put together this like daily email where you get the email, and it's kind of like what I was talking about earlier of how you can invite your congregation into simple practice. So that's what this challenge is the 4 days, Monday through Thursday of the first week of December. Is the invitation is to sit down and use these videos of me creating this art as a form of meditation to get still. And there's like a step-by-step process on how to have a quiet Advent space as a way to speak against the noise of Christmas season for 4 days. And then the 5th day is for members of Faith+Lead. I'm going to do a live workshop for an hour and a half to talk about how you can use simple art making. Like I do these things called Zentangles. They're super easy to do, no drawing skills required. But I'm going to actually teach you how to do that and how to use it as a contemplative practice. And that's live. Like you'll be with me. I'll be guiding you. But the 4 days leading up to it are free for anybody to just use those videos. So that's what the 4-day challenge or the Advent challenge is.
That's awesome. Well, Steve, thanks for sharing your wisdom and your insights. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today. If you want to join the free 4-day Advent challenge, we encourage you to do that and to use that to create some contemplative space for you or people in the ministries that you're connected with. If you are a Faith+Lead member, you can join that live workshop that Steve just talked about, and you can find both of the links to those in our show notes.
And again, thanks to all of you for joining us. To help spread the word about Pivot, please like and subscribe if you're catching us on YouTube, or if you're listening, head to Apple Podcasts and leave a review.
And finally, you know that the best compliment you can give us is to share this Pivot podcast with a friend, so we encourage you to do that. And until next time, this is Terry Elton and Dwight Shiley.